Stories, the CEO fired her, but he didn't know her secret plan for revenge was end. Have you ever felt that nagging suspicion, that quiet voice in the back of your mind telling you that something isn't quite right with the world around you, especially the places where power resides? Have you ever felt that nagging suspicion, that quiet voice in the back of your mind telling you that something isn't quite right with the world around you, especially the places where power resides? Have you ever felt that nagging suspicion, that quiet voice in the back of your mind telling you that something isn't quite right with the world around you, especially the places where power resides? If you thought you knew someone, truly knew them, what would you be willing to sacrifice to test that belief? What if the person you thought you knew was an entire corporation, a vast, sprawling entity built on the very foundation your family laid? I decided not to wait to find out. I shed my identity, my power, and my prestige, becoming a mere shadow in the very halls I was destined to command. And the truth? The truth I uncovered was more shocking, more disheartening, and ultimately, more empowering than I could have ever anticipated. Why would a woman, poised to inherit a multi-billion-dollar global conglomerate, choose to disappear into the anonymity of a low-level data entry clerk? The question might sound absurd to most, a whimsical fantasy for the truly privileged. But for me, Elara Vancroft, it was a necessity born of deep disillusionment. My family, the Vancrofts, had built an empire, Vancroft Global, on principles of innovation and, at least in the early days, a certain degree of ethical foresight. I grew up steeped in stories of my grandfather, a quiet visionary who believed that true business success was measured not just in profits, but in the positive impact one had on the world. My father, too, carried that torch for many years, steering Vancroft Global through turbulent technological shifts, always with an eye on long-term sustainability and employee welfare. I remembered sitting in his expansive study as a child, listening to him explain the importance of integrity, the fragility of trust. Those lessons were etched into my very being. However, as the decades passed, as the company grew into a monolithic entity spanning continents and industries, I watched with increasing dismay as the core values eroded. It wasn't a sudden collapse, but a slow, insidious decay, like a grand old house gradually succumbing to dry rot. I remember one particular board meeting, the scent of expensive cigars clinging to the air, where my father, a visionary even in his later years, proposed allocating a significant portion of our annual budget to sustainable energy research. It was met with polite nods, but then swiftly overshadowed by aggressive acquisition strategies for a rival tech firm, purely to eliminate competition, not to foster innovation. The shift was subtle at first, like a slow-moving glacier, but inexorable. The whispers of market dominance and shareholder value drowned out any mention of ethical innovation or employee welfare. Boardroom discussions became less about pioneering technologies or employee well-being, and more about maximizing quarterly profits, regardless of the human cost. Acquisitions were celebrated for their market share gains, not for the synergy they brought to our collective human capital. The faces around the executive table, even those who had worked with my father, seemed to have traded their humanity for ambition, their empathy for efficiency reports. Their eyes, once alight with purpose, now held a cold, calculating gleam. I saw a company losing its soul, piece by agonizing piece. I was in my early 50s, a seasoned tech entrepreneur in my own right, having built and sold several successful ventures before the inevitable call to assume my role at Vancroft Global. My own companies had been lean, agile, and fiercely employee-centric. I'd cultivated an environment where innovation thrived on trust and collaboration, not fear. The prospect of stepping into the role of chair at Vancroft Global filled me with a profound dread, a heavy weight settling in my chest. My family, the board, even my own sense of duty, dictated that I must. But how could I steer a ship whose rudder I didn't truly understand? How could I implement ethical reforms from the top down if I didn't grasp the depth of the rot from the bottom up? I had inherited wealth, yes, but also a profound responsibility, a legacy that felt tarnished. I couldn't simply step in, issue edicts from a gilded office, and expect genuine change. I knew that true understanding, true insight into the ethical fabric of an organization, couldn't be gleaned from meticulously curated reports or staged corporate visits where employees were coached on what to say. It had to be experienced, felt, lived. So, I devised a plan. A radical, unconventional, and inherently risky experiment that even my closest advisors initially deemed absurd. My head of security, a gruff but loyal man named Marcus, nearly had an apoplectic fit when I first outlined it. "Ms. Vancroft, with all due respect, this is madness. The security risks alone are astronomical." But I was unyielding. I would go undercover. I would become someone else entirely, someone utterly insignificant in the vast machinery of Vancroft Global. My target, Synergy Solutions, one of our key subsidiaries, a division that had seen explosive growth but also, increasingly, whispers of a harsh, unforgiving corporate culture. It was the perfect crucible for my test, a microcosm of the larger empire, where the relentless pursuit of profit seemed to have eclipsed all else. Its recent financial reports, glowing on the surface, felt almost too perfect, stirring my innate skepticism. I spent weeks meticulously crafting my new identity, Elara Davies, a meek, slightly awkward woman in her late 40s, with a patchy employment history that vaguely hinted at a string of short-term, unfulfilling data entry roles. I even spent a few days volunteering at a local charity, diligently entering mundane information into their database, just to ensure my movements and typing speed were convincing. My wardrobe became deliberately nondescript, muted colors, comfortable but uninspired cuts, nothing that would draw the slightest attention. My hair, usually styled with an understated elegance, was tied back in a simple, almost messy ponytail, devoid of any pretense. I practiced softening my gaze in front of a mirror, tempering my naturally assertive posture, and cultivating a quiet, almost invisible presence. I even went as far as creating a false digital footprint, a bare minimum of online activity to pass a basic background check without raising any flags. My usual sharp wit and analytical mind, honed over decades of building companies, had to be carefully reined in, replaced by a quiet diligence, a watchful silence. It was, in essence, an exercise in self-erasure, a stripping away of everything that marked me as Elara Vancroft. My goal wasn't just to observe, but to feel what it was like to be at the very bottom, to be invisible, to be expendable. I needed to understand the true impact of corporate decisions on the lives of ordinary employees, away from the gilded cages of the executive suite. I needed to see if there was any humanity left in the heart of the empire I was about to inherit. My hypothesis was grim, my hope, a fragile flicker. But the only way to know for sure was to become the experiment itself. So, how did the powerful CEO, Caelan Thorne, treat the insignificant clerk, Elara Davies? The answer was swift, brutal, and entirely predictable. From the moment I stepped into the sprawling, impersonal open-plan office of Synergy Solutions, the atmosphere was palpable. It wasn't just a feeling, it was almost a physical weight, pressing down on everyone. A low hum of anxiety permeated the air, punctuated by the relentless clatter of keyboards and the hushed, hurried whispers of colleagues. The fluorescent lights hummed with a sterile indifference, casting a sickly yellow glow on the rows of identical cubicles. The air was thick with the faint metallic tang of stale coffee and desperation. It was a pressure cooker, where every glance, every email, every meeting seemed to carry the weight of an implicit threat, where the slightest misstep could mean swift and brutal reprisal. My days as Elara Davies were a monotonous blur of data entry, rows upon rows of numbers, reports, and projections that seemed to strip the very meaning from information. I spent hours staring at spreadsheets, inputting figures that felt utterly devoid of purpose, a Sisyphean task designed for efficiency, not for human engagement. My fingers ached from the repetitive motion, my eyes blurred from the endless stream of digits. It was mind-numbing work, deliberately so, it seemed, to ensure that no one had the mental space for critical thought or, God forbid, dissent. I observed my colleagues, their tired eyes, their forced smiles that never quite reached their lips, the subtle flinches when Caelan Thorne's name was mentioned in even the most benign context. There was a pervasive sense of fear, a constant awareness that one misstep, one perceived inefficiency, could lead to a swift and merciless termination. Whispers of sudden dismissals for trivial reasons circulated like cautionary tales. It was an environment that actively discouraged collaboration and fostered a cutthroat individualism, everyone looking out for themselves, afraid to stand out or, worse, to be singled out for Thorne's icy scrutiny. Lunch breaks were silent, hurried affairs, everyone eating at their desks, guarding their meager personal time like precious gems. Even the briefest shared laugh felt daring, a rebellion against the pervasive gloom. And then there was Caelan Thorne himself. He was the vortex around which all this fear swirled, the apex predator in this sterile jungle. A man in his late 40s, impeccably dressed in custom-tailored suits that seemed to mock the drabness of our cubicles, with a predatory gleam in his eyes and a smile that never quite reached them. He moved through the office like a shark, not swimming but gliding, scanning, assessing, always looking for weakness, for an opportunity to assert his dominance. His voice, when he chose to use it, was low but carried an undeniable authority, capable of freezing a conversation mid-sentence. He rarely spoke to low-level employees directly, preferring to communicate through terse emails or by having his harried assistants relay his demands, each one delivered with the weight of an ultimatum. But when he did speak, especially in the open plan area, his voice would carry, designed to be overheard, to instill compliance through intimidation, a constant reminder of his omnipresence. I saw him once, during a minor IT glitch, glare at a young technician with such intensity that the man visibly trembled, his hands shaking as he tried to fix the issue. It wasn't about the problem, it was about the power display. I witnessed countless instances of his ruthless approach. A young marketing intern, barely out of college, publicly shamed for a minor typo in a presentation slide during a team meeting, her face flushed crimson as Caelan's voice sliced through the air. An older, experienced project manager, whose wife was battling a serious illness, being pulled into Thorne's glass-walled office, emerging pale and shaken, having been told his personal issues were impacting his performance and he needed to prioritize the company. He looked utterly defeated for days afterwards. Colleagues who dared to take sick leave, even with doctor's notes, would return to a mountain of work and thinly veiled accusations of lacking commitment, their names quietly circulated as unreliable or lacking drive. Caelan's disdain for empathy was not just a character flaw, it was a management philosophy, meticulously engineered to extract maximum output at minimum human cost. He believed that fear was the greatest motivator, and he wielded it like a blunt instrument, chipping away at morale, leaving behind only shattered confidence. His favorite tactic was the public example, finding a minor transgression, blowing it out of proportion, and then making a spectacle of the employee's downfall, all to send a chilling message to the rest, a silent warning that anyone could be next. I meticulously documented everything. Not just in my mind, but discreetly, using a secure, encrypted device I carried, making notes of specific dates, times, and verbatim quotes. Every casual dismissal, every cutting remark, every instance of emotional manipulation was logged. I even managed to access some internal network drives, using my dormant Vancroft credentials from a secure private terminal outside the office, cross-referencing public reports with internal financial data, noticing discrepancies, subtle alterations, and outright fabrications. It was like observing a biological specimen under a microscope, dispassionately recording its destructive behaviors, charting the course of a virulent disease. My initial disappointment solidified into a steely resolve, a cold fire burning within me. This wasn't just about corporate greed, it was about the systemic dehumanization of people for profit, a cancer that had spread deep within the Vancroft global body, far worse than I had ever imagined from my executive perch. The day of my termination arrived with a chilling predictability. I knew it was coming. Caelan, in his constant search for new examples to parade, had been circling my cubicle for days, his eyes lingering on my seemingly diligent but ultimately mediocre presence. I had deliberately made a mistake on a critical report, a numerical discrepancy that, while minor in the grand scheme of things, was just enough to be noticeable, just enough for him to pounce. It was a carefully calculated risk, a final push to force his hand, to experience his cruelty directly, and to solidify my resolve. I needed to feel the full weight of his contempt, to understand what it meant to be truly discarded by his system. He arrived with his executive assistant, a perpetually nervous young woman named Sarah, and 2 HR representatives, a full entourage for what should have been a private conversation. The entire floor fell silent. Every head turned, pretending not to watch, but watching nonetheless, their eyes darting, their bodies stiff with suppressed fear. Elara Davies, Kalen's voice boomed, sharp and cutting, echoing across the hushed office, "A word, if you please." I rose slowly, my heart rate steady, my expression carefully neutral, a mask of meek confusion firmly in place. I walked towards him, past the sea of frozen faces, feeling the weight of their silent observation, their pity, their relief. "Ms. Davies," he began, holding up a printout of the report I had intentionally flawed, a single, damning number circled in red. "It has come to my attention that your attention to detail is lacking. This report, critical to our Q3 projections, contains a glaring error. An error that costs us time, money, and frankly, my patience." He paused, letting his words hang in the air, allowing the humiliation to seep in, to permeate the very fabric of the office. He gestured broadly at the open-plan office, a theatrical flourish. "In this company, we demand excellence. We demand precision. We do not tolerate mediocrity. We do not tolerate individuals who are unable to meet even the most basic requirements of their role." He lowered his voice slightly, but still loud enough for everyone to hear, a chilling intimacy in his tone. "Frankly, Ms. Davies, you're just not cut out for this. You're slowing us down. You're a liability." He then turned to his HR assistant, who quickly pulled out a termination form. "Process her termination immediately. Effective immediately. And please, escort her out. I wouldn't want her lack of attention to detail to spread." His words were delivered with a cold, almost surgical precision. There was no anger, only contempt, a deep-seated disdain for what he perceived as weakness. He wanted to make an example, and I was it. The silence in the office was deafening. I could feel the eyes of my former colleagues on me, a mixture of pity, fear, and silent relief that it wasn't them. A part of me, the part that had been Elara Vancroft for decades, the part that had commanded boardrooms and navigated complex deals, wanted to lash out, to expose him right then and there. But I held firm. This was part of the plan. This humiliation, this blatant disregard for an individual's dignity, was the final piece of evidence I needed. My disappointment in Kalen's character was now complete, utterly unwavering. As I was quietly gathering the few personal items from my cubicle, a worn mug, a small plant, a pen, the HR representative hovering awkwardly beside me, a soft voice broke through the tension. "Excuse me, Ms. Davies." I looked up. It was Lyra Chen, a junior analyst I had occasionally exchanged polite nods with. She was young, perhaps in her late 20s, with bright, earnest eyes that seemed perpetually worried, perpetually looking over her shoulder. I remembered seeing her hunched over her desk late into the evening, her dedication evident, her fear equally so. She stood slightly apart from the other employees, clutching a modest brown bag. She looked terrified, yet defiant. Are you okay?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, glancing nervously at the HR rep, who shot her a warning glance. That was really awful." My heart, which had remained perfectly steady throughout Kalen's tirade, gave a small, almost imperceptible lurch. This was new. This was unexpected. A genuine human connection in this wasteland of ambition. "I'm fine, thank you," I replied, my voice calm, maintaining the subdued persona of Elara Davies. Lyra hesitated, then took a step closer, her resolve hardening, a surprising flicker of courage in her eyes. "Look, I know this probably isn't much, but I packed an extra sandwich today. And some fruit. You probably haven't had a chance to eat. She held out the brown bag, her hand trembling slightly, her gaze unwavering. Please, take it. You shouldn't go hungry. It was a simple gesture, a small act of kindness in a sea of indifference, a solitary beacon in the pervasive darkness, but its impact on me was profound. In an environment where everyone was afraid, where empathy had seemingly been eradicated, where self-preservation was the only rule, Lyra had dared to show compassion. She had risked Kaelin's wrath, risked being seen as sympathetic to an expendable employee, just to offer a meal to a stranger. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated humanity. Thank you, Lyra, I said, taking the bag, my fingers brushing hers. That's incredibly kind of you. As I turned to leave, the HR rep impatiently tapping her foot, Lyra leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, her eyes darting around the office, ensuring no one else was listening. Ms. Davies, she said, her voice strained but firm. I've been keeping some things. Things that show just how much Kaelin has been, stretching the truth. Unethical practices, real malpractices. I've seen it. He forced me to sign off on some reports that I knew were false. I've been documenting everything he's done, because someone needs to know. I think you should have them. My eyes widened almost imperceptibly. This was more than just a sandwich. This was courage. This was integrity. This was the exact kind of internal truth I had hoped to uncover, but never dared to expect directly. Why are you giving them to me? I asked softly, genuinely curious, my voice barely audible. Lyra shrugged, a flicker of defiance in her eyes, mixed with a deep weariness. Because someone needs to do something. And he just makes me sick. He takes advantage of everyone. And you didn't deserve that. No one does. She quickly pressed a small, encrypted USB stick into my hand, disguised as a generic flash drive. It's all on here. Please, be careful. If he knew I had this, if he knew I gave it to you. I don't know what he'd do. I nodded, my fingers closing around the drive, feeling its insignificant weight, yet knowing its immense power. I will. Thank you, Lyra. Truly. As I was escorted out of the building, my calm exterior remained, the mask of Alara Davies still firmly in place, but inside, a new fire had been ignited. The humiliation of Alara Davies had been complete, a necessary evil, but the kindness of Lyra Chen had been the true revelation, the unexpected gift. Kaelin Thorne's cruelty had solidified my purpose, validating every grim suspicion, but Lyra's integrity had refined it, giving it a profound human dimension. My secret plan for revenge, which had initially been about mere retribution for the systemic ethical failures, now evolved into something far grander, a radical overhaul of Vancroft Global's ethical standards, starting with Kaelin's public downfall, and culminating in Lyra's unexpected, deserving rise. The game was indeed in motion, and I finally had all the pieces I needed. But every game has an end, right? And what an ending it was. After being unceremoniously escorted out of Synergy Solutions, I didn't descend into despair or anger. Instead, I felt a serene sense of clarity, a lightness I hadn't felt in weeks. Kaelin Thorne had given me everything I needed, direct evidence of his tyrannical leadership, a first-hand experience of his casual disregard for human dignity, and the final, irrefutable proof of his systemic malpractices, thanks to Lyra. The USB drive she had pressed into my hand was a goldmine, a meticulously compiled dossier of financial irregularities, data manipulation, falsified reports, and even a few instances of questionable legal practices related to a recent hostile takeover. It perfectly complemented my own observations and the internal corporate data I already had access to as Alara Vancroft. Lyra, unknowingly, had given me the last, crucial puzzle piece. I didn't waste a single moment. The moment the taxi pulled away from the Synergy Solutions building, I felt the persona of Alara Davies begin to dissolve. I returned to my true life, shedding the drab clothes and meek demeanor as easily as one discards a worn-out disguise. My penthouse apartment, with its panoramic views of the city skyline, felt like a sanctuary after weeks in the oppressive cubicle farm. I peeled off the muted clothes, the ill-fitting shoes, and took a long, hot shower, washing away the residue of fear and monotony. My team of trusted advisors, a small, discreet group led by Marcus, my head of security, who had been privy to my elaborate charade from the beginning, were already waiting. Marcus, usually stoic, actually let out a long sigh of relief when he saw me walk in, fully Alara Vancroft again. We immediately went to work, cross-referencing Lyra's data with our own, building an ironclad case against Kalen Thorne and, by extension, exposing the ethical rot that had permeated Synergy Solutions under his leadership. Every fabricated transaction, every manipulated report, every instance of employee abuse, every silent scream I had witnessed was meticulously laid bare. The picture that emerged was even more damning than I had initially anticipated, a web of deceit woven with arrogant confidence. The stage for the grand reveal was set for the quarterly Vancroft Global Board meeting, a crucial gathering where Synergy Solutions' latest performance metrics were slated for review. Kalen Thorne, oblivious to the storm brewing, was expected to present a glowing, albeit fabricated, report on his division's supposed achievements, angling for a massive new investment that would solidify his power within the conglomerate. It was the perfect moment for maximum impact, a public forum where his hubris would be confronted by the cold, hard truth, where his carefully constructed facade would shatter for all to see. The morning of the meeting, the air was thick with anticipation, though none of the board members or executives present understood the true nature of the impending confrontation. They saw Kalen Thorne, smug and self-assured, making last-minute adjustments to his presentation, his usual confident stride echoing through the executive halls. They saw the usual faces, the familiar power dynamics, the air of quiet, expensive authority. What they didn't see was the sleek, obsidian black limousine pulling up to the exclusive executive entrance, its tinted windows concealing the quiet, confident woman inside, her presence radiating an undeniable authority that was both inherent and newly forged. I stepped out of the car, my tailored suit, a deep charcoal gray, a stark contrast to the faded clothes of Alara Davies. My hair was swept back in a sophisticated chignon, my posture commanding, my eyes sharp and discerning, reflecting a renewed purpose. The security guards, accustomed to seeing me only on rare, formal occasions, snapped to attention, a flicker of surprise in their eyes. I walked through the opulent marble lobby, past secretaries and junior executives, none of whom recognized the insignificant clerk they might have once brushed past in the cafeteria. The Zygarnik effect was at play, an unresolved tension that pulsed beneath the surface. They knew something was coming, a significant announcement perhaps, but they couldn't fathom its true scale, the seismic shift about to occur. I entered the grand boardroom, a vast chamber of polished mahogany and high-back leather chairs, an arena where power was traditionally wielded and decisions finalized. The murmur of pre-meeting chatter died instantly as I walked to the head of the long table, the seat reserved for the chair of Vancroft Global, a position my father had occupied, and one I was formally set to assume in the coming weeks. Kalen Thorne, mid-conversation with a bewildered board member, froze. His eyes, usually so calculating, widened fractionally, a flicker of something akin to confusion. He registered my presence, perhaps initially mistaking me for some high-level external consultant, someone of importance but not immediately threatening to his carefully constructed world. Then, as I met his gaze, a flicker of recognition, a dawning horror, began to spread across his face, the blood draining from it. "Good morning, gentlemen. Or perhaps, good afternoon, Mr. Thorne," I began, my voice calm, clear, and resonant, utterly devoid of the meekness of Alara Davies. Every syllable was imbued with the quiet power of someone who held all the cards, who knew an undeniable truth. "It seems you've all been rather busy." A stunned silence filled the room, heavy and suffocating. The board members exchanged confused glances, their faces a mixture of surprise and unease. Kalen Thorne's face went from pale to ashen, his jaw slack. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out, only a choked gasp. "My name is Alara Vancroft," I continued, letting the name sink in, watching the realization dawn on faces around the table, a ripple of understanding spreading through the room. "And as of this moment, I am assuming my full responsibilities as the chair of Vancroft Global, effective immediately." I paused, letting that announcement land, seeing a few gasps, a few chairs shift. "And my first order of business concerns Synergy Solutions." I then motioned to my legal team, who began distributing thick binders to each board member, their expressions grim. "For the past several weeks," I stated, my eyes fixed on Kalen Thorne, whose composure had completely shattered, his chest heaving, "I have been conducting a comprehensive, first-hand audit of Synergy Solutions. Not from the comfort of this boardroom, but from within its very walls. You might have known me as Alara Davies, a data entry clerk. A very expendable data entry clerk, according to Mr. Thorne." Kalen lurched forward, his face contorted in a mask of disbelief and raw, unadulterated rage, spittle forming at the corners of his mouth. "This is preposterous. A stunt. You were spying. This is illegal." "Illegal?" I countered, raising an eyebrow, a cool, almost amused glint in my eye. "I believe the term is due diligence, Mr. Thorne. And what I uncovered is far more illegal than any stunt. I gestured to the binders. "Inside those binders, you will find meticulously documented evidence of deliberate data manipulation, unethical business practices designed to artificially inflate revenue, and a corporate culture steeped in fear and intimidation. The very culture you, Mr. Thorne, meticulously cultivated, a culture that poisoned the well of our company." I clicked a remote, and the large screen behind me, which moments ago displayed Kalen's meticulously crafted, false projections, now showed an array of damning spreadsheets, internal memos, manipulated financial statements, and even audio recordings I had legally obtained from my undercover work, discreetly gathered over weeks. The evidence was irrefutable, each slide a nail in his coffin. I calmly walked the board through Kalen's transgressions, item by item, presenting the factual, cold dismantling of his empire, his carefully constructed house of cards. Every insult he had hurled at Alara Davies, every public humiliation he had orchestrated, every casual act of cruelty he had committed, was now reflected back at him, amplified by the undeniable weight of his own wrongdoing. The board members, initially bewildered, were now gripped by a chilling realization of the true depths of the ethical quagmire, their faces a mixture of shock and disgust. Kalen Thorne, the ruthless CEO, was cornered, exposed, and utterly helpless, his empire crumbling around him. The fallout was immediate and devastating, as swift and merciless as Kalen Thorne's own dismissals. So what happened to them all, you might ask? The answer is a stark illustration of karmic balance, of justice delivered with meticulous precision. For Kalen Thorne, the architect of his own demise, the punishment was absolute. The board, presented with overwhelming, irrefutable evidence of his malfeasance, voted unanimously for his immediate termination. The vote was a formality, their faces clearly showed they wished they could have done more. There was no severance package, no golden parachute. His corporate credit cards were cancelled on the spot, his executive access revoked, his company car repossessed from the parking garage within the hour, leaving him stranded and humiliated. The news of his spectacular fall spread like wildfire through the corporate world, fueled by the sensational revelation that the new chair of Vancroft Global had gone undercover to expose him. His name became a cautionary tale, a whispered warning in boardrooms across the globe. His reputation, once built on a foundation of ruthless ambition, crumbled into dust. Legal investigations, initiated by Vancroft Global and later by regulatory bodies, swiftly followed, leading to frozen assets, public humiliation, and the very real prospect of criminal charges for fraud and unethical practices. The man who delighted in making spectacles of others' downfalls became the ultimate spectacle himself, a pariah in the world he once dominated. I heard whispers of him struggling to find even a consulting gig, his name now synonymous with corporate deceit and toxic leadership. He lost everything he truly valued: power, money, and status. It was a fitting end for a man who believed those were the only things that mattered. And then there was Lyra Chen. The young, idealistic junior analyst who, with a simple act of kindness and a brave sharing of truth, had changed the trajectory of both her own life and the future of Vancroft Global. I sought her out personally, inviting her to a private meeting in my executive office, the very room where the board meeting had concluded, where the scent of victory mingled with the lingering tension. She walked in, nervous and hesitant, her eyes wide, still seeing me as the Elara Davies she had tried to help, the victim of Kalen's cruelty. "Lyra," I said, rising from my chair and extending my hand, a genuine warmth in my voice. "Thank you for coming. Please, sit." She sat on the edge of the plush leather chair, her eyes wide with apprehension, clutching her hands in her lap. "Ms. Vancroft," she stammered, clearly overwhelmed. I don't understand why I'm here. I hope I didn't cause any trouble." I smiled, a genuine, warm smile that had been hidden for weeks, a smile of profound gratitude. "You're here, Lyra, because you are everything Kalen Thorne was not. You are integrity. You are courage. You are compassion. Your actions, Lyra, were the most significant I witnessed in that entire organization." I then explained, carefully, how her small act of kindness, the sandwich, the USB drive, had been the final, crucial piece of my undercover investigation, the confirmation that there was still good, still hope, within the company. Her eyes grew wider with each word, disbelief warring with dawning comprehension, her jaw slowly dropping. You were Elara Davies," she whispered, a hand flying to her mouth, her voice a mere breath. "The one oh my God." "Indeed," I confirmed, a soft chuckle escaping me. "And your actions revealed your true character. When everyone else turned away, when they were gripped by fear, you stepped forward. You risked everything to help a stranger, and to speak the truth." The reward I bestowed upon Lyra was commensurate with the profound impact she had made. I offered her a newly created, senior leadership position within Vancroft Global, head of corporate ethics and employee relations. This wasn't a token gesture, it was a mandate, a genuine partnership to help me fundamentally reshape the company's culture, to ensure that the practices Kalen Thorne embodied would never take root again. Her role would involve implementing robust whistleblower protections, fostering a culture of psychological safety where employees felt valued and heard, and establishing clear, empathetic HR policies across all subsidiaries, designed to support, not suppress. Furthermore, I ensured she received a substantial financial bonus, enough to secure her family's future, lift them from any financial worries, and a significant grant of Vancroft Global stock options, tying her success directly to the company's revitalized ethical future. I wanted her to know that good deeds were not only recognized but rewarded, profoundly. Lyra's reaction was a mixture of stunned disbelief and overwhelming gratitude. Tears welled in her eyes as she grasped the enormity of the opportunity, her entire body trembling slightly. I just wanted to help," she murmured, shaking her head, still processing it all. "I just couldn't stand to see him do that to you, to anyone." "And that, Lyra," I said, placing a hand on her shoulder, feeling a profound sense of rightness, "is precisely why you are now a cornerstone of the new Vancroft Global. Your empathy, your courage, that is the foundation we will build upon." In the aftermath, the transformation of Vancroft Global was nothing short of revolutionary. With Kalen Thorne's public downfall serving as a stark warning, I initiated a sweeping ethical overhaul. My first action as chair was to implement a culture of compassion initiative, prioritizing employee well-being, transparency, and ethical conduct above all else. We launched anonymous feedback channels, established a mentorship program that crossed departmental lines, and re-evaluated every single HR policy through a lens of empathy and fairness. Lyra, thriving in her new role, became an indispensable ally, her genuine empathy and sharp insights guiding the implementation of new policies that fostered trust and respect. Synergy Solutions, under new, ethical leadership, began the long process of healing and rebuilding, shedding its toxic image and becoming a model for other divisions. I found a profound peace of mind in knowing that the empire my family built was finally being steered back to its moral compass, guided by principles rather than just profits, its legacy redeemed. The lesson I learned about human nature, about corporate power, and about myself, was indelible. True character, I discovered, is not revealed when someone is faced with their superiors, or when they stand to gain something. It is revealed in the quiet, unobserved moments, in how one treats those who are perceived as having no power, those who can do nothing for them. It is in the willingness to extend a hand of kindness, to speak truth to power, even when it means personal risk. Kalen Thorne, consumed by his ambition, saw only opportunities for personal gain and dominance, reducing people to mere cogs in his profit machine. Lyra Chen, with her simple act of empathy, saw only another human being in distress, deserving of basic decency. And in that stark contrast, the true measure of a person, and indeed, of an entire organization, was laid bare. Integrity, compassion, and courage are not just admirable traits, they are the true foundations of lasting success, both personal and professional. They are the bedrock upon which true empires are built and sustained. I learned my lesson about human nature. Our channel is full of stories like this, where the true colors of individuals are revealed in the most unexpected ways, where quiet heroism can change the world. If you've enjoyed this journey, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story. And tell me, have you ever been surprised by someone's true colors? Tell me your story in the comments below.